Surah 25. Underlying the first half of this surah is a discourse dealing with opponents. The objections put into their mouths seem on the whole more appropriate to Medinan Jews inspecting the new prophet than to Meccan that aren't really of anything that they would call a revealed religion. Well, I don't know if that definition of what they're trying to say when they say pagan is whatever, but not anything linked to a prophet of God religion as far as we know, that sort of thing. Because certainly the spirits, some of them actually call people to be their cult leaders. Still, they may possibly be Meccan, and it is difficult to see how, at the beginning of the Medinan period, verse 3 could be applied to any but idolaters. The discourse has, however, been revised probably at a period when the split with the Jews had become more pronounced. And there is the possibility that passages originally of different dates were brought together at the revision. The section 18 to 21 must belong to a still later date. Its insertion on the back of 12 through 17. Well, when you flip the page, right? Cause the separation of verse 22 from the section 8 through 11. The three alternative conclusions of verse 23, which of course all agree, but might be supposed to belong to these three times, but none of them seems as late as 18 to 21, and it is impossible to be sure even of the order in which they stand. The passage citing the examples of the order of the previous unbelievers 37 to 42 seems to belong to the early Medinan period. From verse 43 to 63, we have a series of sign passages, which seems to have been earlier than the original basis of the preceding part of the surah, and to have been adapted to it by the addition of rhymed phrases, and to have been added to that at the same time. Here and there are traces of a later Medinan revision. Well, there's not, revision is the wrong word, but sometimes the whole passage wasn't learned, and the prophet would say this before this, and that sort of thing. The passage describing the servants of the merciful at the end of the surah has a different rhyme from the rest. It is, however, connected in sense with verse 60 and 61, and its rhyme was the rhyme of 62, 63. Whatever be the date of the original passage, 64 to 66, the edition 67 to 75 is certainly early Medinan, and there are still later alterations at 40 and 76. Surat al-Furqan, chapter of the Furqan. Unbelievers reject Allah, late Meccan or early Medinan with later revision. Well, okay. Yeah, where's the evidence of any of this revision or editing? No one's ever found any, but resurrection, as in the rousing, connected to the death. The Qur'an, not a fraud. Medinan, 5 through 7. Objections to the kind of messenger. Verses 8 through 11. Punishment of unbelievers, verse 12 to 17, like Meccan. Messengers taken as gods. Deny responsibility for such. Medinan. I had a vision once that some entities told me, hey, that one entity led a bunch of other entities and said, I spoke something like I spoke to somebody by an idol, and as confusion became worship. So just about our statue or something. Yeah, so not, some things are just humans thinking, oh, that must be a god, right? Something in the, you know, who was it? The Plato that said the Damans, Da'imun, that they didn't, you know, they weren't, you know, they just seem like divinities because they're so other compared to us, but there's really something more, right? I don't remember how exactly, so I'm going to stop there, but the messenger's human, 22, much like 11, demand for angel messengers, verse 23 to 26. Same date as verse 8, 9a, 11, 22. (24 to 26), like 27, 28, well, you know, serving the same purpose anyways. And 29 to 31, the same thing. People are avoiding the Qur'an, verse 32, Meccan. Medinan, verse 33. The Qur'an comes in portions, Meccan with Medinan, 34 to 42. So, okay, there's some notes here. So, you know, at death, we're going to maybe see the angels. That's the comment there. And if people feel like they're being treated unfair amongst the Arabs, some of them would say, you know, talk about taboos and the place of the noonday rest, you know, the halting place, you know, because when the sun's at its highest, you want to get out of that intense radiation, right? I mean, when you're tropical. The verse arrangement of the Quran, Surah 73, verse 4, it's that same sort of passage in verse 34, if that's the right numbering. I'm not sure with Richard Bell here. So after the unbelievers destroyed, we have further mention, that's Meccan, messengers being ridiculed in Surah 40, in ayat 43 and 44, Medinan additions in 45 and 46, serving the same purpose as 43, 44, and 47 to 76, signs, Medina, and, okay, Aras, some identification. While some say they were the redheaded people of the north, some people say some other things, people of the wood. Sodom, well, the cities of the plain, there's said to be 7. Sodom and Amra actually formed a lesson more than too literal of an example. And some of the speakers, the rain being sent, no, that's not it. Where the note? Oh, the people saying that, oh, well, we have our gods. Why are you leading us astray from our gods? So there was complaint from that going on. And so we turned to 26. This surah consists for the most part of 7 stories of previous messengers, the main burden of which is the destruction of the unbelieving peoples. These are bound together by a recurring refrain, which is also found at the end of the introductory paragraph, verse 7 and 8. One has the impression that there are really 2 refrains, the second being later than the first. With the exception of the first 2, Moses and Abraham, the stories also begin in the same way and are in fact largely schematic, with only a verse or 2 devoted to distinctive features of each. It may be noted that the story of Noah has only at the very end, a reference to the ark and the flood. That these stories rest upon an earlier basis is shown by the fact that Lot is quite separate from Abraham. But on the other hand, there are distinct traces of the Medinan. Notably, the recurring verse, show piety towards Allah and obey me, and the use of fasada to cause corruption. The fullness of the Moses story and the fact that Aaron is associated with him at the beginning. Though in the body of it he hardly appears. Only in one or two places, however, can breaks in the stories be detected. And the conclusion seems to be that they have been rewritten in early Medinan times on the basis of previous versions. The same probably holds of the introductory paragraph, verse 2 to 5, the date of which is otherwise uncertain. The closing section shows revision more evidently. It contains fairly early Meccan elements, but can be made to it probably at various times. Verse 1 shows that the surah was to be for inclusion in the book, but it has probably assumed its present shape before the book period, and the changes made upon it at that time must have been slight. Yeah, it's kind of a strange way to phrase it, right? The book period. It was all known to be part of the book, but the Medinan heading for inclusion in the book, verse 1 through 8. Stories of previous messengers, early Medinan on Meccan basis, verse 9 through 68. The reference to Pharaoh, verse 17 through 21, may have been from another period, but since it matches and all these so-called insertations match, I don't know what to make of that sort of comment. The unthankful as an unbelieving, the word kind of holds on some of the other, both meaning. The children of Israel, the translation given as literal as possible, that is usually taken as referring to the upbringing, or the verse stood as a question. Perhaps it should go with 15b and 16. Well, the weaving of the themes and the connections, yeah, this isn't some Genesis to Exodus sort of book. This is an effectual book. So when you're saying it's confused because it's not operating entirely on chronological order, is okay, but it's not confused in that way either. So so the victors, the answer to the people, because the people were like, well, let's see how this magical throwdown happens, and see, let's wait our decision to see what's going to happen. And the calling for the signs to be made, Surah 7 verse 103, because yeah, there's people that was like, hey, if you're telling the truth, bring us the evidence, or bring us even the destruction. It's like, no, don't ask for that. What's wrong with you? Abraham, verse 69 to 104. But before that, we have, you will be followed with this and what follows. So Abraham, Moses, the rest of them knew they weren't, the end prophet. If we talk of the book of Revelations thing, which that's not really the authority that people think it is, because it's apocalyptic literature, but that was before most of the Gospels. So that refutes the idea that, well, you'd have to kick out half the so-called New Testament if you're going to say that. The book of Acts wasn't written yet. And it's obviously, even if you don't know that stuff, it's only talking about its own stuff. See, this guy had a vision, and the book of his vision, and those who add or subtract to it, everybody should treat their visions like that. But Surah 44, 8-22 is connected with that. So Surah 19, 8-51 is connected to this stuff about the latest generations. Then we have this, Noah, Nuh, 105 to 122. Hud and the people of Ad, 123 to 140. But there's a note that I missed. I don't Oh, the vanity. So the amusing yourself. Islam doesn't forbid, in any era, it doesn't forbid fun or art or whatever, but it says don't make it mere fun. Because honestly, you find the people that are merely trying to enjoy themselves not have as much fun in life. Saleh and the people of Thamud, 141 to 159. Enchanted, as in those who dealt with the evil magic to the point where they become demented. Maybe not the right way to comment on that, but you know, but there's a distinction between the being Majnoon, you know, having that demonic quality, having that quality of a jinn, and being, you know, and lightheartedly, you know, skillfully. That's an odd way to say lightheartedly, because lightheartedly might mean not serious. But then again, if you're super skilled and you accomplish something without even being serious, that could be how you think of that. The creation of the ancients, you know, the invention, the custom, you know, you go beyond custom. Sunnah and hadith, all this talk about the final hadith, it's not saying that Muhammad's sayings or doings or something are not something we refer to. It's saying that just don't go after any tradition and saying. That's all it's saying. What sayings? Is it the inspired sayings of your Lord with a capital L, you know, Rabb, you know, Lot, 160 to 175, Shu'aib, 176 to 191, Surah 783 and 1186, you know, Shu'aib telling his people, hey, don't mess with the fairness of the balance. You know, there's people that could keep our currency from falling apart. Well, they're getting richer right now. So, you know, they're driving up prices of stuff rather than to drive up their profit margins and stuff like that. So you be careful with the balance of the economy. That was the Shu'aib lesson. Well, you be just with it. The revelation is authentic, 192 to 197. Something maybe a bit later, 198 to 209. A lot of speculation, not regarding the narrations about the teaching of the verses in which order and the chapters and that sort of thing. I'm not sure that Richard Bell refers to any of that in his collection. Not inspired by the Satans, verse 210 to 220. You know, you could say, were they considering Muhammad personally or the content? Well, they did both. They considered his character and they considered what he was, you know. So the scriptures of the ancients, Psalms, if that's not the right word, maybe it's closer to Proverbs. I don't know, remember which word is being used there. So after verse 220, we have to whom the Satans inspire. Oh, don't write the Jews in the parentheses. Maybe some of the conservative alterations, you could say, but yeah, the poets and all that, but not all poets. See, it's not against art of any type. It's talking certain stuff. But Medinan and 227, 228, still Medinan. And so in prayer, standing in prayer is the essential thing. Now, lowering the wing, being humble and all that. And now we turn to the notes of Surah 27. This surah seems to belong in the main to about year 2, to which the introduction is probably to be assigned, but it contains earlier elements. The story of Moses as it stands dates probably from the same time as the introduction, but there are traces in it of an earlier underlying rhyme. The original form seems to be earlier than in Surah 20 and maybe Meccan. verse 15 and 16 may be early, but the story of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba must be as a whole Medinan, as is shown by the use of the term Muslim, verse 38, 42b, 45, the position of 42b, which evidently was originally the continuation of 40a, seems to argue that alterations were made at some later date, and perhaps the episode of the ants, verse 18 and 19, may have been inserted at that time. The story of Saleh and Thamud, here given, quite different from other versions in the Quran. Of course, there's no contradiction, though, but the plot against the prophet resembles that traditionally said to have been made against Muhammad himself just before he left Mecca, and have been based on that. If so, the story would be early Medinan, with only the framework of the earlier story retained. The story of Lot, on the other hand, appears to be practically a repetition of the early form. From verse 60 to 87, the surah seems more or less continuous, and as the passage of verse 78 brings clearly the time when Muhammad is assuming an independent position against the Christians and Jews, year 2, the whole may be assigned that time. But the use of earlier materials fairly clear in verse 60 to 65, and it's probably in other sections. Verse 84 connects none too well with its context, and its presence may be due to later insertion, verse 83, but there is no compelling reason for that assumption. Verse 88, however, is clearly out of place, and it is curious to have the judgment scene of verse 89 to 92 falling so closely upon that of verse 85 to 87. The question arises whether verse 85 and 87 are not a later insertion for which the back of 88 to 92 has been utilized. Well, if they're writing on the back, it just has no bearing on whatever. Because if it was something they could write on the back of, they wrote on the back. It didn't matter how many verses could fit on each side. That was just what was done. Verse 89 to 92, an underlying rhyme in A, followed by a constant, can be detected. A presence of a Meccan element in verse 93 to 95 is made practically certain by the reference to the Haram of Mecca. Muhammad is indeed said to have declared the district of Medina a Haram, but the form of expression and the fact that it is spoken of in Muhammad's own person without say being prefixed, as is done verse 94 and 95, seem to imply that we have here an early declaration which has been added to and adapted at the close of the early Medinan Surah. Well, a response that you're supposed to say, a response that has been revealed to something else, and it relates to this, and just, Surat An-Naml, chapter of the Ant, introduction, believers and unbelievers, Medinan, middle of the year 2. So you get the impression that there is some reference, but in general, there's not the reference to the, I don't know how many, hundreds of narrations that tell you where, the composition of the chapters themselves. But the 6 verses here, the call of Moses, Meccan, verse 7 to 14, and Baladuri Futa al-Budan relates, what does it relate? That's note 1. Medinan a harem, that's in the introduction. Like Surah 20 ayat 9 and 28 ayat 29, we have the mention of Moses in this sort of way. A brand mentioned instead of a flame. At the okay, and John, the serpent. Remember, in ancient Egypt, the jinn were referred to with reference to fire and serpents. So Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, early Medinan, 15 through 20, 15 to, what is it? And here, 40, okay, to 45. And of course, this is the one with the extra 19, well, not the extra 19 letters, but it has those 19 letters. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, it has that twice. So, 1 Kings 10, also Zadarsky, page 124, second Targum, on the Book of Esther, translated in Castle, Commentary on Esther, are stuff they're calling to recommend to. Surah 21, 78, the bird language, also referred to. The holding of the order. Okay, we can go back. The him having the host of men and birds, 1 Kings 4:33. Okay, the urged on, so the holding them in order, verse 19 and 17, connected to 20 in the sense of marshaling the ranks. That suits well. The Valley of the Ants. The Jewish literature mentions it as well. And people say it's based on Proverbs 6:6. And the hoopoe, the hood. Okay, a lot of the stuff in Talmudic and other literature is not entirely based on the certain passages in the Bible. Actually, the Bible is compiling some of the histories and stuff that had side notes that were never included in the Bible. Okay, the hood, you know, the hoopoe bird. I don't remember exactly what the thing looks like to describe it, but a little way off, a little while off, same phrase, I guess. Sabah is Sheba in the biblical speak. You know, the ones who submit as Muslimin, you know, because that's the point. It's not to humiliate people, it's just have them surrender to God. The Queen's messenger. And a gift shows one's own wealth. Like some of the potlatch stuff, some parts of the world, they don't like it. Holding a dinner is one thing, but a potlatch, like some sort of display of wealth, it's something people who aren't religious do. That's so some people, some African Americans, real African Americans, take issue with it. So ifrit, well, it's an Arabic word. Afreed is creature, but in Arabic, it's like a very strong demon. There's a lot of legends about how somebody has to be killed or raped or something in this area for an Afreet. Or perhaps you can use that energy and then you'll find whatever. Or perhaps an Afreet has to, comes along as the tempter. If there's a wrongful killing, I'm not just talking illegal, but a wrongful killing, then perhaps an Afreet shows up and recommends it or whatever. But not all Afreet stalwarts or whatever are shayateen. So I probably oversimplified the whole thing. Literally turning their back, you know, the twinkling of the eye, the unbelieving, ungrateful, because kafir, you cover the truth, or by your actions or your belief. So sarh is an Ethiopic South Arabian word, and inlaid, marada, means to make smooth, sometimes for the purpose of covering over with some other substance, and becoming Muslim, you know, surrendering with Solomon, Lord of the world, to the Lord of the worlds, you know, Allah. I skipped over some of it, but you know what I mean. I surrender myself with Solomon to Allah, the singular and definitive term for God, Lord of the worlds. Okay, and after verse 54, we start the thing about Lot, and Lot's verse 55 to 65. And they're warned, much like in Surah 26, 873. And this version of Lot's story coincides more with 778. And Medinan Saleh on the caravan route to Syria. The next of kin is the one that typically would avenge the blood, even against fellow kin, apparently. Not in this passage, but 9 of a group. So the people who were against Saleh, it's only 9 people. But if you know that there's a group of 9 people or a group of corrupt politicians or something, stop voting for them. Don't say it's, oh, it was those handful of people at the top. No, don't vote for them. Don't whatever. Call for their prosecution for the real crimes against society and whatnot run by these people. But anyways, the bird augury based on the flight of birds. Yeah, but Islam's not doing that. And honestly, like the flight of birds, I'm going to bring up this one. What happened in 2014? There was some stuff going on with Ukraine that was being provoked by America and Ukraine, but and then Crimea was taken. But anyway, the Pope released 2 peace stuffs, and then in came a seagull, bit a chunk of one of the bird, bits off some feathers of the dove, but it got away. And then the other one, the camera, you can't find camera footage after the first, but a crow comes in and obviously the other dove was done for. And people now after the fact are saying this stuff about, oh, well, it means that Russia's going to take part of Ukraine and then it's going to come in and obliterate the rest of it, and there's going to be scattering problems maybe elsewhere, or I don't know what they're saying. But people need to stop with their divination predictions and stuff like this, where they're just waiting for stuff to happen, and then after stuff happens they're like, oh, I made the right prediction. It's like you didn't divine nothing. You're making guesswork based on what's already becoming apparent. That's not quite the same thing as being spiritually informed. But the 2 seas of partition, because you do see distinction between the seas, distinction between the saltier part of the sea and other stuff. It's not saying that eventually there's not mixing of the fresh water kind of dissipates and stuff, but there's pressure that makes the things distinct. So if there's fresh water being released into the sea and you know what's going on, you can actually drink fresh water in the middle of the ocean. But Surah 25:55 is really that. And there's land masses between the oceans and stuff, and even oceans, even some ocean, even some of the big seas, like even where they're next to each other, you can see on this side that sea and the other side the other sea, so you know which one's which. The harbingers, the vicegerents, then we talk about the rain, the winds, and the mercy, and the successing, and the falls, and all that stuff. Then we have, so God only knows the future, 66 and 68. Oh, 67's in the middle there. The resurrection, 69-72. Meccan with Medinan. We have the judgment maybe near, possibly Meccan, Medinan addition. They say, when is this threat coming? If you speak the truth, say it may be. Okay, the brought out, what's the note there? From the grave, rides Pilion behind you, something close behind you, kind of like a wave creeping up or something, right? Thou art upon the clear truth, you're clearly right. And coming Muslim means surrendering yourself. And you might want to refer the beast being brought forth, the Apocalypse 13 and Daniel 7. Well, there's different sorts of visions like that. But yeah. And the judgment, Medinan 85-87. A sign, 88. Judgment, 89-92. Muhammad's mission, 93 to 95. Okay, the Muslim are those who surrendered themselves. Muslim in the Aramia, you know, the biblical speak. There's some passages that say that certain of the prophets, their followers, were known by that, you know, because this was before people were known by Jews and they didn't think to edit the tradition. So some stuff like that bleeds through. The district, so the Haram of Mecca, it's not just the cube, or the Haram of the Jerusalem and Medina is not just whatever. And people say, like, praying this mosque of mine, it's not the original floor plan, it's outside, whatever. Now that Muhammad's grave that they put in the middle there, that's not part of the masjid, but you know, he said not to do that sort of stuff, and that he didn't even bury him right. But what happened with a lot of the prophets, some of them were left out in the wilderness and stuff, try to claim whatever. But verse 17 of 5 is the urging forward. And what's the other one? The day being secure, you know, from the terror of that day. And I guess I'm going to stop there.